Hey guys, tonight we begin with the shadowy, romanticized, and thoroughly miserable world of medieval assassins. Hollywood shows you cool professionals in black leather doing parkour. The reality: you are sleeping in ditches, living in constant fear, one mistake away from execution. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start by destroying the fantasy. When you think medieval assassin, you probably imagine someone who chose this life. Someone recruited by a secret organization, trained in exotic fighting techniques, given high-profile targets and paid in gold. Wrong on every count. Medieval assassins weren't elite warriors. They were bottom-tier criminals, doing the absolute worst job available because they had no other options. The path to becoming an assassin wasn't a path at all. It was a series of disasters that left you with exactly one skill: being willing to kill people for money. You didn't apply. You didn't get recruited. You fell. You fell so far down the social ladder that murder for hire was the only thing left between you and starvation. Most medieval assassins started as something else: failed soldiers who deserted, thieves who got caught and escaped, peasants who committed a crime and couldn't go home, men who killed someone in a fight and were now fugitives. You are not a professional. You are a desperate person with a bounty on your head and nothing to lose. That is the medieval assassin resume. Wanted: criminal seeks employment. Skills: violence. References: none because they're all dead. The term assassin itself comes from the Nizari Ismailis in the Middle East, who supposedly used hashish, though that is debated by historians. But in medieval Europe, there was no formal assassin guild, no training academy, no code of honor, just criminals who specialized in murder because it paid better than stealing chickens. Which isn't saying much, because medieval assassination paid terribly. Here is how it actually worked. Someone wanted someone else dead, but didn't want to do it themselves. Maybe a merchant wanted a rival eliminated. Maybe a minor noble had a grudge. Maybe a wife wanted her husband gone. They couldn't hire a reputable soldier or knight. Too risky, too expensive, too likely to refuse or report them. So they hired you, a nobody, a criminal, someone disposable, someone who, if caught, could be blamed entirely, while the person who hired you walked away clean. Finding work as an assassin required connections in the criminal underworld. Taverns in the bad part of town, places where thieves, smugglers and other criminals gathered. You'd make it known that you were available for certain work. Carefully, using euphemisms, because openly advertising murder for hire was an excellent way to get arrested and hanged. You want someone gone, you need a problem solved, you hear about a job. That kind of language, vague enough to have deniability, specific enough that the right people understood. When someone wanted to hire you, the meeting was always in some horrible location: a back alley, an abandoned building, the worst room in the worst tavern. Never anywhere public, never anywhere respectable. You'd meet your employer, usually some nervous merchant or scheming relative, and they'd explain the job. Kill this person, make it look like an accident. Do it quietly, don't get caught, and definitely don't mention who hired you. The pay was insulting: a few silver coins, maybe a handful of gold if you were lucky, and the target was important. Not enough to live on for more than a few weeks, which meant you needed multiple jobs, multiple murders. You couldn't retire after one hit and live comfortably. You were trapped in a cycle: kill to eat, eat to survive long enough to kill again. This is your career now: serial murder, out of economic necessity. And the advance payment? Often nothing. You got paid after the job was done, which meant you had to fund your own assassination attempt, buy your own weapons, pay for your own food and shelter while you planned. Take all the risk up front. If you failed, you got nothing. If you got caught, you died. If you succeeded, you got whatever pittance your employer deemed appropriate. There were no contracts, no legal recourse. If your employer decided not to pay you after, you'd already murdered someone. What were you going to do? Sue them? You were a criminal who just committed murder. You had no leverage. You took what they gave you and hoped it was enough. Let's talk about the actual work, the planning, because medieval assassination required extensive planning. You couldn't just walk up and stab someone in broad daylight. Well, You could, but you'd be caught immediately and executed. So you had to be smart. You had to observe your target, learn their routine, find vulnerability, and do all of this without arousing suspicion, which was difficult when you were a stranger in a small medieval town where everyone knew everyone. You are trying to blend in, but you don't belong here. You are not from this town. You don't know anyone. You have no legitimate business. You are just hanging around, watching someone's house, asking subtle questions about their schedule. This is incredibly suspicious. Medieval communities were tight. Knit, strangers stood out. People noticed you. They wondered why you were here. They asked questions. You had to have a cover story. Traveling merchant, pilgrim, distant relative visiting. Something plausible but forgettable, and you had to maintain this lie while gathering intelligence on your target. The observation phase could take weeks. You needed to know when your target was alone, where they went, what time they woke up, where they were vulnerable. Did they walk to church every morning? Did they visit a certain tavern? Did they have a routine you could exploit? All of this required patience, and money to survive while you waited, money you didn't have. So you are starving while you plan a murder, sleeping rough, looking increasingly disheveled and suspicious. The longer the job takes, the more desperate you become, and desperation makes you sloppy, which gets you caught. Medieval towns didn't have streetlights, didn't have police patrols, but they had something worse: communal vigilance. People looked out for each other. They noticed when something was off. They investigated strange noises. They questioned unfamiliar faces. If you were seen near a crime scene, you were immediately suspect. And medieval justice didn't require much evidence. Suspicion was often enough. You were a stranger. Someone died. You must have done it. That is the logic. And once accused, you were basically guilty unless you could prove otherwise. Which you couldn't, because you did do it. The actual murder was the fastest part of the job, and the most terrifying. You are not a trained killer. You are a desperate criminal with a knife. You don't know the most efficient way to kill someone. You don't have poison or exotic weapons. You have a blade and fear and the knowledge that if this goes wrong, you are dead. So you wait for your moment. Your target is alone. It is dark. You approach. Your hands are shaking. Your heart is pounding. This is it. You strike. But killing someone isn't like the movies. It is not clean. It is not quick. Your target screams. They fight back. There is blood. So much blood. More than you expected. It is on your hands, your clothes, your face. The smell is overwhelming, metallic, warm, nauseating. And they're not dead yet. They're gurgling, thrashing, looking at you with eyes that convey absolute terror and betrayal. You have to stab them again, and again, until finally, mercifully, they stop moving. You are covered in blood. You are in shock. You've just killed another human being, and now you have to leave. Fast, before someone finds the body. Before someone sees you. You try to clean off the blood, but it is everywhere. In the dark, you can't see it all. You are walking through the town, trying to look normal, while blood-soaked and trembling. Every person you pass might notice, might see the blood, might realize what you've done. The walk back to wherever you are staying feels like hours. Every shadow is a guard. Every noise is someone discovering the body. Every person is a potential witness, who'll identify you tomorrow when they find your target dead. If you make it out of town without being caught, you are not safe. You still need to collect payment, which means meeting your employer again. And your employer now knows you are a murderer. They might decide it is safer not to pay you. Or worse, it is safer to kill you. You are a loose end, the only person who can connect them to the crime. Some assassins got paid. Some got a knife in the back instead. Medieval employer-assassin relations were built on mutual distrust and the constant possibility of betrayal. Let's say you got paid a few silver coins, maybe 20. That is your reward for weeks of planning, days of terror, and a murder that will haunt you forever. 20 silver coins is enough to live on for maybe a month if you are frugal. Then you need another job, another murder, another cycle of observation, fear, violence, and blood. This is your life now. Serial murder for poverty wages, living in constant fear, hunted by the law, distrusted by criminals, haunted by your victims. The lifestyle of a medieval assassin was barely a step above homelessness. You couldn't stay in one place long, too dangerous. After every job, you moved to a new town, new region, somewhere your face wasn't known. This meant constant travel, on foot, sleeping outdoors, begging or stealing food. You couldn't check into decent inns. They asked too many questions. Wanted to know your business. You stayed in the worst establishments. Flop houses where no one cared who you were as long as you paid. Or you slept outside, in forests. Abandoned buildings. Under bridges, medieval assassins were essentially homeless murderers, drifting from town to town. Your possessions were minimal. A knife, maybe a short sword if you could afford one. A change of clothes probably stolen. A small amount of money quickly spent. That is it. No home. No family, no friends, no stability, nothing to tie you to anywhere or anyone, because connections were weaknesses. If the law caught up with you, anyone you knew could be questioned, tortured, executed for harboring a criminal, so you stayed alone, always alone. Loneliness wasn't just a side effect of the job, it was a survival requirement. Food was a constant problem. You weren't earning enough to eat properly. Most of your money went to bare survival expenses, travel, weapons maintenance, bribes if you needed to avoid trouble. Food was whatever you could afford, or steal, stale bread, questionable meat, ale because water wasn't safe. The medieval assassin diet wasn't designed for optimal performance. It was designed for not starving to death. Barely, you were always hungry. Malnourished, weak, which made the job harder, which made you more desperate, which made you more likely to make mistakes. Your health deteriorated rapidly. Constant travel, poor nutrition, no medical care, injuries from fights or the physical demands of the work. You couldn't see a physician. They'd ask questions, might report you, so you dealt with injuries yourself, infections, untreated wounds, broken bones that healed wrong. By your late 20s, if you lived that long, your body was wrecked. You moved like someone twice your age. Your hands shook, your vision was poor, your teeth were rotting. You looked like exactly what you were, a desperate dying criminal. The psychological toll was devastating. You'd killed people, multiple people. You remembered their faces, their screams, the way they looked at you in those final moments. These memories didn't fade. They intensified. Especially at night, when you tried to sleep, you saw them. Heard them, felt their blood on your hands again. Every assassination added another ghost to your collection. Some assassins tried to drink away the memories, spent their earnings on ale or wine, tried to numb the guilt. It didn't work. The ghosts remained. The guilt intensified. And the drinking just made you more likely to get caught. Some assassins convinced themselves they were doing necessary work, eliminating bad people, serving justice. This was a lie. Your targets weren't evil warlords or tyrants. They were merchants with business disputes, wives with abusive husbands, nobles with inheritance conflicts, ordinary people caught in ordinary feuds. You weren't an agent of justice. You were a weapon used by people too cowardly to do their own killing, and you knew it. Everyone knew it. The moral rationalization didn't hold. You were a murderer, period. Medieval society viewed assassins with absolute contempt, lower than thieves, lower than beggars. At least thieves stole out of need. At least beggars were trying to survive without hurting anyone. Assassins killed for money. That was unforgivable. If your profession was ever discovered, you were immediately executed. No trial, no appeal. Summary execution was standard for assassins, because letting you live meant letting a proven murderer walk around free. Society couldn't tolerate that, so they killed you, publicly, painfully, as a warning to others. The execution methods for assassins were particularly brutal. Hanging was too quick, too merciful for someone who murdered for money. Some regions used breaking on the wheel. Your limbs were broken with heavy wheels or hammers while you were tied to a wagon wheel. Then you were left to die slowly, sometimes taking days. Other regions used burning, alive. They'd tie you to a stake and light the fire. You'd scream for minutes before finally dying. Some places combined methods, breaking first, then burning, or hanging, drawing, and quartering. Your body was destroyed because you destroyed the social fabric by killing for hire. The punishment matched the crime's severity, but most assassins never faced formal execution. They died in other ways, killed by rivals, murdered by employers trying to tie up loose ends, executed by victims' families who caught up with them, killed in botched assassination attempts when the target fought bad, bled out from injuries, died of infection, froze to death sleeping rough in winter, starved because work dried up. Medieval assassins had a life expectancy measured in months, not years. If you survived your first year doing this work, you were lucky. If you survived 5 years, You were a statistical anomaly. Most died within weeks of their first job. There was no retirement plan for assassins. You didn't save up money and quit. You couldn't transition to legitimate work. You had no references, no skills except murder, no connections except criminals. You couldn't apply for a normal job. Where did you work before? Assassin. What are your qualifications? Killing people. Medieval employers weren't hiring former murderers for respectable positions, so you were stuck. You did this work until you died. Which usually wasn't long. Some assassins tried to escape the life. They'd take one last job, plan to collect the payment, and disappear. Move to a different country. Change their identity. Start fresh. This almost never worked. The medieval world was small. Information travelled. Someone always recognized you. Or your past caught up with you. Or the guilt became unbearable, and you confessed to a priest, who then reported you to authorities. There was no witness protection program, no identity change process. You were who you were. What you'd done defined you, forever. Let's talk about specific historical examples. The Nizari Ismailis mentioned earlier were the closest thing to organized assassins in the medieval period. Based in Persia, they were a religious political sect that used targeted killings to advance their goals. But even they suffered tremendous losses. Their fortresses were eventually destroyed by Mongol invasions. Their members were hunted down and killed. The organization was dismantled. Being part of an organized group didn't make you safer. It made you a bigger target. In medieval Europe, assassination attempts were common, but assassins themselves were rarely documented, because they were considered too lowly to record. Chronicles mentioned that someone was murdered, but rarely named the murderer unless they were caught and executed, and even then, details were sparse. John the Murderer was hanged today for killing William the Merchant. That is it. No backstory. No explanation of why John became an assassin. History didn't care about you. You were disposable. Forgettable. A footnote in someone else's story. The weapons available to medieval assassins were limited. You couldn't afford quality blades, couldn't commission custom weapons. You used whatever you could steal or buy cheap. A basic knife, a small dagger, maybe a short sword if you got lucky. These weapons weren't designed for assassination. They were general, purpose tools. A kitchen knife repurposed for murder. A hunting knife used on humans instead of animals. You didn't have specialized silent weapons. No garrotes, no poisoned darts. Just crude blades, and the hope you could get close enough to use them. Poison was theoretically an option, but practically unavailable. Medieval poisons required knowledge and resources assassins didn't have. You'd need to know which plants were deadly, how to extract and concentrate the toxins, how to administer them without being detected. This was specialized knowledge held by apothecaries, physicians, and nobility, not desperate criminals. Some assassins tried using poison anyway. Usually, it didn't work. Either the poison wasn't strong enough, or it was too obvious. Victims who suddenly died after eating or drinking raised immediate suspicion. Everyone present became a suspect, including the suspicious stranger who'd been hanging around. So most assassins stuck with blades. Direct, brutal, obvious, but effective, if you could get close enough. The lack of training was a critical problem. Medieval soldiers trained constantly. Knights spent years mastering combat. Even city guards had basic training. Assassins had nothing. You learned on the job. Your first murder was often your first time seriously hurting anyone. You didn't know how much force was needed, where to strike for a quick kill, how to control a struggling victim. You learned by making mistakes. And mistakes in assassination usually meant you or your target ended up more injured than intended, or you made too much noise, or you left too much evidence. Each job was a learning experience. The ones who survived learned fast. The ones who didn't became cautionary tales. The social isolation destroyed assassins psychologically faster than the physical dangers. Humans need connection, community, belonging. Assassins had none of that. You couldn't make friends, couldn't trust anyone, couldn't share your burdens. Every interaction was transactional. Every person you met might betray you. You lived in a state of constant paranoia. Everyone was a potential threat. Every conversation might be a trap. This kind of isolation breaks people. Some assassins went mad. Started talking to themselves, seeing things that weren't there, losing grip on reality. Mental illness wasn't recognized or treated in medieval times. You just got stranger and stranger until eventually someone noticed, and you were executed or left to die alone. The fear was constant and exhausting. Fear of being caught, fear of the next job going wrong, fear of your employer betraying you, fear of rival criminals, fear of your victims' families seeking revenge, fear of God's judgment. Medieval people believed in hell. Seriously believed. Murder was a mortal sin. Multiple murders meant eternal damnation. You were going to hell, definitely. Unquestionably. That knowledge hung over everything. Some assassins tried to repent, confessed to priests, sought absolution. But the church's position on serial murderers was clear. You'd condemned yourself. Confession might save your soul, but you'd still spend centuries in purgatory, or forever in hell if God deemed your repentance insufficient. Sleep well with that knowledge. The weather made everything worse. Medieval assassins worked year. Round murder didn't pause for winter, but operating in winter conditions was miserable and dangerous. You are trying to observe a target while freezing, sleeping outside in below freezing temperatures, trying to stay hidden while your breath creates visible fog. Your hands are so cold you can barely grip your knife. Your target is bundled up, making vulnerable areas harder to access. And winter days are short. Darkness comes early, which is good for concealment, but bad for observation. You can't see what your target is doing in the dark. Can't follow them without making noise on frozen ground. Winter assassinations took longer, cost more, and were far more likely to fail. Summer wasn't much better. Heat meant bodies decomposed faster, which meant murders were discovered sooner. It meant you sweated more, leaving more evidence. It meant towns were more active, with more people on the streets, making it harder to move undetected. It meant food spoiled faster, water was more scarce, and diseases spread more rapidly. There was no good season for assassination. Every season had its own unique difficulties that made your already terrible job even worse. Let's address the biggest myth about medieval assassins, that they were mysterious and cool. They weren't. They were sad, desperate, broken people doing horrible work because they had no alternatives. There was nothing romantic about slowly dying of malnutrition while planning your next murder. Nothing exciting about sleeping in a ditch because you couldn't afford shelter. Nothing glamorous about being universally despised by everyone, including other criminals. Medieval assassins were the bottom of society, beneath contempt, beyond redemption, living proof that humanity's capacity for desperation has no flaw. The children of assassins, if any existed, inherited nothing but shame. If your father was a known assassin, you were permanently tainted. No one would hire you. No one would marry you. You were the murderer's child, forever marked. Some assassins kept their profession secret from their families, left home and never returned. Let their families believe they were dead, rather than learn the truth. Better to be remembered as dead than as a serial killer. Better your children think you died honorably than learn you murdered people for coins. The relationship between assassins and other criminals was complicated. Thieves looked down on assassins. At least we don't kill people, they'd say. Smugglers avoided them. Murderers were bad for business, attracted too much attention from authorities. Even prostitutes, themselves marginalized and despised, refused to associate with known assassins. Everyone in the criminal underworld drew a line somewhere. And murder for hire was on the wrong side of that line for almost everyone. You were too dangerous, too likely to get caught, too likely to bring trouble. So even among criminals, you were isolated. Some assassins worked with accomplices, usually another desperate criminal willing to split the payment. One person to distract or restrain the target, another to deliver the killing blow. This doubled your chances of success and halved your payment. It also doubled the chances of betrayal. Your accomplice might decide to kill you and take the full payment, or they might get caught and give up your name to save themselves, or they might spread word about the job, and suddenly everyone knew you were an assassin. Accomplices were risk multipliers. Most experienced assassins worked alone, not out of preference, out of bitter experience. The tools of the trade were depressingly simple. A knife, sharpened regularly on stolen whetstones. A dark cloak, stolen or bought cheap, already stained from previous jobs. A bit of cloth to gag victims if needed. Rope, occasionally useful for creating accidents. That was it. No specialized equipment, no elaborate disguises, no secret gadgets. Just basic items anyone might carry, repurposed for murder. The simplicity was both an advantage and a limitation. You couldn't be caught with suspicious equipment, but you also couldn't be effective beyond close-range blade work. Let's talk about the failures, because most assassination attempts failed. The target wasn't where you expected. Someone interrupted at the crucial moment. You hesitated. The blade didn't penetrate deeply enough. The victim screamed louder than anticipated, attracting attention. You slipped on blood or mud and couldn't finish the job. Medieval assassination had a failure rate of probably 60 to 70%, which meant most of your attempts ended with you running away empty-handed, having wasted weeks of preparation and whatever money you'd spent on the attempt. Failed assassinations had serious consequences. Your employer wasn't understanding about failure. They'd paid you, or promised to pay you, and expected results. Failure meant no payment. Worse, it meant your target was now aware someone wanted them dead. They'd increase security, become more cautious, making future attempts much harder. Your employer might blame you, might hire someone else to finish the job, might even decide you were now a liability and arrange for your death. Failure wasn't just disappointing, it was potentially fatal. Some assassins specialized in making murders look like accidents. This was more difficult but paid slightly better because it reduced the client's risk. You'd arrange for your target to fall from a height, or drown, or get trampled by a horse, or die in a fire. These methods required more planning, and often more time. A fall needed the right location and opportunity. Drowning meant getting the target alone near water. Fires required preparation and timing. And even when executed perfectly, accidents raised suspicions. People weren't idiots. When someone dies conveniently shortly after a business dispute or inheritance issue, questions are asked. Investigations happen, and investigations found evidence. A rope that shouldn't be there, a suspicious bruise, a witness who saw something. Accident assassinations were harder to pull off than they sounded. The winter months were particularly desperate for assassins. Work slowed down, people stayed indoors more, travel was difficult, targets were harder to isolate, and you still needed to eat. Many assassins turned to other crimes during winter. Robbery, burglary, anything to survive until spring when assassination contracts might resume. But winter crime was also more risky. Tracks in snow, fewer places to hide. Longer nights meant longer darkness, which helped concealment, but also meant cold that could kill you if you stayed out too long. Some assassins didn't survive winter. Froze to death while sleeping rough, starved because work dried up, died attempting desperate robberies, because they were out of options. The impact of religion on assassins varied. Some assassins lost their faith entirely. How could a just God allow the world to become so terrible that murder for hire was a viable profession? Others became more religious, desperately seeking forgiveness for their sins. They'd pray between jobs, beg God for mercy, promise to repent and change, then take the next contract because they needed the money. The cycle of sin, regret, prayer, and repeated sin destroyed them spiritually. Some assassins made pilgrimages, hoping to earn forgiveness through penance. They'd walk hundreds of miles to a holy site, pray intensely, then return to assassination, because they had no other skills. The church offered salvation for sincere repentance, but sincerity is hard to measure when you keep committing the same mortal sins. Medieval assassins sometimes operated across borders, fleeing one kingdom for another when things got too dangerous. But international work came with additional problems. Language barriers, unfamiliar customs, different laws. You'd arrive in a new country not speaking the language, not understanding local social norms, standing out even more than usual. Finding work required connections you didn't have. Building those connections took time and money you couldn't spare. Many assassins who fled to foreign lands died there, alone and unremembered, killed by locals who didn't trust foreigners, or caught by authorities who didn't hesitate to execute suspicious strangers. The few assassins who lived long enough to get old faced a special kind of horror. Your body broke down, your hands shook too much for precise knife work, your eyes weakened, making observation difficult, your hearing diminished, making it harder to detect danger. You couldn't run fast anymore, couldn't fight effectively, but you still needed to eat. So you took jobs you shouldn't take, riskier targets, desperate attempts. Old assassins didn't retire peacefully. They died badly, caught because they were too slow, killed because they were too weak to defend themselves, executed after botched jobs they would have completed easily when younger. Age was a death sentence, in a profession where peak physical condition barely kept you alive. Some assassins tried to transition into related work. Bodyguards, enforcers for criminal organizations, muscle for smuggling operations. But the reputation followed you. If you were known as an assassin, people didn't trust you as a bodyguard. They assumed you'd betray them for the right price, because you would. That was literally your job. Trust wasn't something assassins inspired. Fear, yes. Respect, sometimes. Trust, never. So even career transitions were mostly closed off. You were an assassin. That is all you'd ever be. That is all anyone would ever see you as. The boredom between jobs was maddening. Assassination required intensive bursts of activity followed by long periods of nothing. You'd complete a job, collect payment, then wait for the next contract. Days, weeks, sometimes months. You couldn't be productive during this time. Couldn't learn a trade, couldn't build anything. You just existed. Waiting, drinking to pass the time. Trying not to think about what you'd done or what you'd have to do next. Boredom and guilt are a toxic combination. Many assassins contemplated suicide during these periods. Some followed through. Better to end it yourself than wait for the inevitable execution or assassination by a rival. Medieval assassins developed recognizable patterns that authorities learned to watch for. A stranger in town asking about someone's routine. Someone with no visible means of support, who nonetheless stayed at a tavern for weeks. A person who kept to themselves, never made friends, avoided conversation. These patterns triggered suspicion. Smart sheriffs and town guards kept lists of suspicious individuals. Not formal records, just mental notes. That guy seems off. He's probably up to something. When a murder occurred, these suspicious individuals were rounded up first. Often, the actual assassin was among them. Medieval law enforcement might have been primitive, but it wasn't stupid. They knew what to look for. And assassins fit the profile too perfectly. The interrogation methods for suspected assassins were brutal. Medieval authorities used torture freely. They'd hang you by your wrists until your shoulders dislocated. Crush your fingers, apply hot irons. Stretch you on the rack. Not to get confessions, though that happened. To get names. Who hired you? Who else are you working with? Where are they? Torture was about extracting intelligence, and most assassins broke eventually. The pain was too much. You'd give up your employer's name. Describe other assassins you knew. Betray anyone to make the pain stop. This information gathering created cascading arrests. One assassin's confession led to employers being arrested, which led to them naming other people they'd hired, which led to more assassins being caught. The few historical records we have of actual medieval assassins are almost all execution records. So was hanged for murder. This person was burned for assassination. The records don't tell us how they became assassins, what jobs they'd completed, how long they'd survived, just that they were caught and killed. History remembers them as a name on a death list. Nothing more. Their entire life, all their suffering and sin and desperation, reduced to a single line in an execution ledger. Even in death, they received no dignity. Their bodies were often displayed publicly, hung in cages at crossroads as warnings, left to rot as deterrents. You didn't even get a proper burial. Your body became public property, a teaching tool about the wages of sin. Let's talk about specific cases. In 1407, Duke Louis of Orleans was assassinated in Paris by hired killers working for John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. The assassins ambushed Louis in the street, hacked him to pieces with swords and axes, then fled. They were never caught. This sounds like a success story for assassins, but the full context is darker. The assassination triggered decades of civil war in France. Thousands died. The political instability weakened France, so much that England nearly conquered the entire kingdom during the 100 Years' War. The assassins who killed Louis probably thought they'd done a job and gotten away with it. In reality, they'd helped destroy their own country. No amount of payment could justify that outcome. In 1192, Conrad of Montferrat, king of Jerusalem, was assassinated by two members of the Nizari Ismailis. The assassins posed as Christian monks for weeks, gaining access to Conrad's court. When the moment came, they stabbed him to death. One assassin was killed immediately. The other was captured, tortured, and executed. This is often portrayed as a masterful assassination. Two dedicated agents, perfect infiltration, successful kill. But from the assassin's perspective, it was a suicide mission. Both men knew they'd die. They were religious fanatics, willing to martyr themselves for their cause. That is not professional assassination. That is religious, motivated terrorism. The dedication was impressive. The outcome for the assassins was exactly what you'd expect: death. Medieval assassins sometimes worked for noble employers who provided better resources but worse risks. A noble patron might provide weapons, information, safe houses, but they'd also be more paranoid about loose ends, more likely to have you killed after the job to ensure silence. more capable of hunting you down if you tried to run. Noble employers had resources regular criminals didn't. Knights, soldiers, informant networks. If a noble decided you were a liability, you were dead. No amount of running or hiding would save you. Some assassins considered noble contracts too risky, despite the better pay. Better to work for merchants who lacked the resources to hunt you effectively. The difference between an assassin and a common murderer in medieval legal terms was slim. Both killed unlawfully. Both faced execution. The distinction was premeditation and payment. Assassins planned their kills and received compensation. Common murderers killed impulsively or for personal reasons. But the law didn't particularly care about these distinctions. Dead body equals execution for whoever did it. The legal nuance mattered only in determining whether to investigate who hired the assassin. If you were an assassin, you'd be executed. If you'd been hired, your employer might also be investigated and executed. That was the extent of legal distinction. The urban versus rural divide affected assassination work significantly. Cities offered anonymity and numerous targets, but also more guards and more witnesses. Rural areas offered fewer witnesses, but everyone knew everyone, making strangers incredibly suspicious. Assassins had to adapt their methods based on location. In cities you could blend into crowds, but you needed to be careful around organized law enforcement. In rural areas you had fewer guards to worry about, but couldn't blend in at all. Some assassins specialized in urban work. Others stuck to rural contracts. Each had advantages and nightmares. The seasonal festivals and market days created opportunities for assassins. Large crowds meant better cover. People were drinking, distracted, focused on celebrations. A murder in the middle of a festival might not be discovered for hours. The chaos helped you escape. But festivals also meant more people who might see you. More potential witnesses, and people at festivals talked. A stranger at the festival who disappeared right when someone died would be remembered and described. Festival assassinations required careful timing. Strike at the peak of chaos. Disappear in the confusion. Hope no one noticed. You specifically among the hundreds of faces. Women assassins were incredibly rare, but not unheard of. Medieval society didn't expect women to be violent, which provided excellent cover. A woman could get close to targets more easily than a man, could claim to be a servant or relative, could use poison more effectively because women were expected to prepare food. But the few female assassins who existed faced additional horrors. If caught, their executions were even more brutal than men's. Women who violated gender norms by committing violence were seen as particularly monstrous, unnatural, demonic. Their punishments reflected this. Burning was common for female assassins because burning purified the demonic. The logic was medieval and horrifying. The relationship between assassins and their weapons was intimate and practical. Your knife wasn't just a tool. It was the only thing keeping you alive and employed. You maintained it obsessively, sharpened it regularly, kept it hidden but accessible. Slept with it under your clothes. Lost your knife and you lost your livelihood. Some assassins named their knives, developed superstitions about them. This knife has never failed me. This blade has taken 12 lives. The personification of the murder weapon was a coping mechanism, transferring guilt from yourself to the object. It is not me killing people, it is the knife. I am just the hand that holds it. The psychological distance this created was thin but necessary. Medieval medicine couldn't help assassins who got injured. Physicians would ask how you got stabbed, why you have defensive wounds, why you are covered in scars from knife fights. The questions would expose you. So assassins treated their own injuries. Crude field medicine. Washing wounds with alcohol or urine, stitching cuts with regular thread, hoping infection didn't set in. Many assassins died not from their work but from infected wounds, sustained during their work. A small cut during a scuffle, ignored because you had to flee, became infected. The infection spread. You developed fever, sepsis, death, all because you couldn't seek proper medical care without risking arrest. The few assassins who survived long enough to truly reflect on their lives almost universally expressed regret. Not the shallow regret of wishing they hadn't gotten caught. Deep existential regret about the path their life had taken. In confession records and court testimonies, captured assassins described their lives as wasted, consumed by violence and fear, devoid of meaning or joy. They'd killed people for money that they'd quickly spent, achieving nothing permanent, building nothing, leaving nothing behind except corpses and trauma. The self-awareness came too late to matter. By the time you truly understood what you'd become, you were already on the execution platform. Some medieval assassination attempts were commissioned by groups rather than individuals. A merchant's guild wanting a rival eliminated. A village collectively hiring someone to kill a tyrannical lord's enforcer. Group contracts meant shared payment, which meant even less money per person. But groups were also more likely to betray you afterward. Too many people knew about the contract. Too many people who might inform authorities to save themselves or eliminate a witness. Group contracts were paradoxically more dangerous than individual ones, despite seeming safer through shared risk. The legacy of medieval assassins is nearly non-existent. No monuments, no records of their lives, no acknowledgement of their existence beyond execution notices. They're historical ghosts. We know they existed because murder contracts exist, and murdered bodies exist. But the individuals themselves vanished. No names remembered, no stories passed down. Complete erasure. In a way, that is the ultimate indignity. You lived a life of suffering and violence, died horribly, and history doesn't even remember you existed. You are not even a cautionary tale. You are nothing. Medieval assassins achieved complete historical invisibility through their combination of being too low class to record and too criminal to commemorate. The philosophical question of whether medieval assassins were victims or villains has no clean answer. They were both, victims of a social system that offered no safety net, no economic mobility, no legitimate opportunities for people who'd fallen through the cracks, but also villains who chose, however constrained that choice was, to murder innocent people for money. They killed victims who were themselves often just people caught in disputes, not of their making. The moral complexity doesn't excuse the actions, it just explains them. Medieval assassins were created by a brutal system, but they still committed brutal acts. They deserve neither sympathy nor celebration, just cold historical acknowledgement of what they were. Desperate people doing horrible things in horrible circumstances. The comparison between medieval assassins and modern contract killers shows both continuity and change. The economic desperation remains similar. The social isolation remains similar. The psychological damage remains similar. But modern assassins have advantages medieval ones didn't. Better weapons, better escape routes. Modern forensics are harder to evade, but also modern geography is larger. You can disappear more thoroughly now. Medieval assassins had nowhere to run. The world was small. Communities were tight. Strangers were noticed. Modern contract killers can cross continents. Change identity. Vanish. Medieval assassins could only vanish into death. The job's core horror remains constant across centuries. You kill people for money until something kills you. Only the details change. Let's address the ultimate question. Was it worth it? For medieval assassins, did the money and survival justify the life? The answer from every angle is no. The money was barely enough to survive. The work destroyed you physically and psychologically. Society hated you. The law hunted you. Your life expectancy was measured in months. You died alone, unmourned and damned. There is no calculation where this works out positively. Medieval assassins didn't do the work because it was worth it. They did it because they couldn't imagine any alternative, couldn't see a way out, were trapped by circumstances and choices, until assassination seemed like the only option. And once you'd killed your first target, the path was set. You were an assassin, now, forever, until death. The training that did exist for assassins was informal and usually catastrophic. A more experienced assassin might take on an apprentice, not out of kindness. For backup, someone to help with observation, create distractions, carry supplies. The apprentice watched and learned how to identify vulnerable targets, how to approach without being noticed, where to strike for maximum damage, how to create false alibis. This training period was incredibly dangerous. You were committing crimes, but not yet skilled enough to do them safely. Many apprentice assassins were caught and executed during this learning phase. The ones who survived became journeyman assassins, taking their own contracts, probably eventually taking their own apprentices. The cycle continued, passing down techniques for efficient murder from one desperate criminal to the next. Now let's walk through a specific assassination in detail. You are in a mid-sized town in 1320s France. Population maybe 2,000. Your target is a cloth merchant named Guillaume. You don't know why someone wants him dead. Don't care. You were paid half up front. 5 silver coins. You'll get 5 more when Guillaume is dead and the body is discovered. Total payment, 10 silver coins. Enough to live on for maybe 6 weeks if you are careful. Worth murdering someone for. That is not a question you ask anymore. You arrived in town 3 days ago. Claimed to be a travelling peddler whose goods were stolen by bandits. A sympathetic lie that explains why you have nothing to sell but need to stay in town. You've been sleeping in the stable of the cheapest inn, paying 2 copper coins per night. Eating 1 meal a day, usually stale bread and weak beer. Spending as little as possible because you don't know how long this job will take. Guillaume is cautious. He is a successful merchant, which means he has enemies, which means he has probably been threatened before. He doesn't walk alone. During business hours, he stays in his shop with apprentices present. At night he goes home to a house he shares with his wife, 3 children, and 2 servants. The house is in the better part of town, surrounded by other merchant homes. Neighbours who'd notice screams or suspicious activity. You've been observing for 3 days, learning his routine. Guillaume opens his shop at dawn, works until mid-morning, takes a break to visit the church for midday prayers, returns to his shop, works until evening, walks home. The church visit is your opportunity. For about 20 minutes, Guillaume is away from his shop and not yet home. He walks through a relatively quiet section of town, a narrow street between the church and the commercial district. Not completely isolated, but less trafficked than other routes. This morning is the day. You woke up at dawn, already dressed in your darkest clothes. Your knife is tucked into your belt, hidden under your cloak. You ate nothing. Your stomach is too tight with anxiety. This never gets easier. Every assassination is terrifying. You are about to kill a man who has done nothing to you, a man with a family who loves him. But you need the money, and you've crossed too many lines to develop a conscience. Now, you position yourself in an alley along Guillaume's route from the church. You arrived an hour early, couldn't risk being late, so you wait. Hidden in shadows, trying to look inconspicuous if anyone passes. A drunk sleeping it off, a beggar resting, anything but a murderer waiting for his target. The church bells ring noon. Guillaume will be leaving any minute. Your heart is pounding. Your hands are sweating despite the cold. You grip the knife handle under your cloak. Force yourself to breathe slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. The breathing technique another assassin taught you. It doesn't calm you down, but it keeps you from hyperventilating. You see him, Guillaume, walking down the street, alone. Perfect. He is 50 feet away, 40, 30. He is not looking around, not suspicious. Just a man walking home from prayers. 20 feet you step out of the alley, casual, like you are also just walking 10 feet. You move behind him. He doesn't notice. 5 feet. You are directly behind him. Your hand is on the knife. You strike. The knife goes in between his ribs, angled up toward his heart. Guillaume gasps. A wet, surprised sound. He tries to turn. You hold the knife in, twisting. He is stronger than you expected. Fighting back, grabbing at you. You pull the knife out. Blood sprays. More than you anticipated. It is on your hand, your sleeve. His clothes are soaked. You stab again. His throat this time. The blade cuts deep. Blood pours out. He is making horrible gurgling noises. Trying to scream, but can't because his throat is cut. He falls to his knees. You should run now, but you are frozen. Watching him die, his eyes are wide, looking at you. Terrified. Confused. Why are you doing this? What did I do? His eyes ask questions. You can't answer. He collapses face. First on the cobblestones. Twitches once. Twice. Then stops moving. You are standing over a corpse. In the middle of a street, covered in blood. Move. Run. Now your brain finally engages. You turn and walk quickly back into the alley. Not running. Running attracts attention. You walk with purpose, like you have somewhere to be. Your heart is pounding so hard you think it might burst. Every person you pass might see the blood, might realize what you've done, might raise the alarm. You make it back to your stable. No one stopped you. You duck into an empty stall. Strip off your bloody cloak and shirt. Your hands are shaking. You use straw to wipe off the visible blood. It is in your hair, on your face, under your fingernails. You clean as best you can. Put on your other shirt, the only spare clothing you own. Bundle the bloody clothes and hide them under loose straw in the corner. You'll retrieve them later and dispose of them properly. Right now, you need to establish an alibi. You walk to the main room of the inn. Order ale. Sit in a visible spot. Chat with the innkeeper. Make sure people see you. See that you are not covered in blood, not acting suspicious. You are just a traveller having a drink. Nothing unusual. The ale tastes like ash in your mouth. You force yourself to drink it. Force yourself to appear calm. Inside, you are screaming. You just killed a man. Stabbed him multiple times. Watched him die. His face is burned into your memory. Those eyes, that expression, you'll see it forever. Hours later, someone discovers Guillaume's body. You hear the shouting from the inn. Someone's been murdered. Guillaume the merchant. Who would do such a thing? The town erupts in activity. Guards questioning people. Neighbours forming search parties. Everyone looking for the killer. And you are sitting in the inn, drinking ale, looking concerned like everyone else. Who could have done this? Terrible tragedy. You say the words. Sound appropriately shocked. No one suspects you. Why would they? You are just a peddler who lost his goods. You have no connection to Guillaume, no motive. You are invisible. The investigation continues for 3 days. Guards question everyone. You are questioned briefly. Where were you at midday 3 days ago? In the market, you lie, looking for work. Did anyone see you? Maybe. I talked to several merchants. Vague enough to be believable. Unverifiable, in no one can contradict you. The guard nods, moves on. You are not interesting. Just another transient nobody. The guard is looking for someone with a motive, a business rival, a family member. Someone with a reason to want Guillaume dead. They never consider random murder for hire. Why would anyone kill Guillaume for no reason? It doesn't make sense. Which is exactly why you got away with it. After a week, the investigation stalls. No suspects. No evidence. The town moves on. Guillaume's widow is devastated. His children are fatherless. His business is in chaos. None of that is your concern. Your concern is collecting the other half of your payment. You leave town quietly. Travel 2 days to a pre-arranged meeting spot. Abandoned mill outside a different town. Your employer is there. They hand you 5 more silver coins. Don't ask questions. Don't thank you. Don't acknowledge what you've done. They just want confirmation. He is dead. Yes. They nod. Leave. You never see them again. You have 10 silver coins. Guillaume is dead. His family is destroyed. You are haunted by his dying eyes. This is your life. This is what you do. And in about 6 weeks, when the money runs out, you'll do it again. Because you don't know how to do anything else. Because this is who you are now. An assassin. A murderer. A ghost drifting from town to town. Leaving corpses and shattered families behind you. The aftermath of that job haunts you for weeks. Every time you close your eyes, you see Guillaume. His face, his blood. Hear his gurgling attempt at screaming. You drink more. Try to drown the memories. Doesn't work. The memories are stronger than the alcohol. You consider stopping, finding different work. But what work? You are a wanted man in multiple jurisdictions. You have no trade, no references. Murder is your only skill, your only option. So you keep going, take another contract, and another, each one adding new ghosts to your collection. Each one making you less human and more machine. A killing machine running on desperation and silver coins. The medieval assassin's relationship with death was complex. You caused death regularly, but feared your own death constantly. Every job might be the one where you are caught. Every night sleeping, rough might be the night someone cuts your throat for your coin purse. Every meal might be poisoned by someone who discovered what you are. Death wasn't abstract. It was immediate, present, waiting. You lived in death's shadow, dealing death, expecting death. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on you. You killed others but desperately wanted to live yourself. But wanting to live and having reasons to live are different things. You wanted to live out of pure survival instinct. But you had nothing to live for. No relationships, no goals, no future except more murders and eventual execution. You were already dead. Just still walking around. Let's talk about the specific methods assassins used. Stabbing was most common because it required minimal equipment and worked reliably at close range. You'd aim for vital organs, heart, throat, kidneys, liver, anywhere that caused rapid death or disability. The problem with stabbing was the physical contact required. You had to get close, touch your victim, feel them die. The intimacy was traumatizing. Some assassins preferred clubbing. A heavy wooden club to the head could kill instantly if you hit hard enough. Less blood than stabbing, but loud. The sound of a skull cracking wasn't subtle. And if you didn't hit hard enough, your victim would scream. Clubs were better for ambushes in isolated areas where noise wasn't a concern. Strangulation was another option. Quiet, no weapons required. Just your hands or a rope. But it took time. Minutes of sustained effort. And victims fought back hard when being strangled. Scratched, kicked, struggled violently. You'd end up with defensive wounds. Scratches on your face and hands. Evidence that would be noticed and questioned. Strangulation was intimate and exhausting. You felt your victim's life leaving them, felt their pulse slow and stop under your hands. The psychological toll was immense. Most assassins avoided strangulation if other options existed. Drowning was used occasionally. Ambush your target near water. Knock them unconscious or overpower them. Hold them under until they stop struggling. Then leave. The body might not be discovered for hours or days. Cause of death would appear to be accidental drowning. The problem was finding targets near water at the right times. Rivers and ponds weren't conveniently located for every assassination, and holding someone underwater while they fought was difficult. They'd thrash, create noise and splashes, potentially attract attention. Drowning was a method of last resort or opportunity. If the situation allowed it, fine, but it wasn't reliable enough to plan around. Pushing targets from heights could work in cities with tall buildings or near cliffs. Wait until your target was alone near a drop. Push they fall, dead or critically injured. Looks like an accident, but the same problems applied. Finding targets in the right locations required luck, and pushes weren't always fatal. Your target might survive with injuries. Then they'd describe being pushed. Investigation would follow. Pushed. From, height assassinations were high. Risk, high reward. When they worked, they were clean and deniable. When they failed, you'd created an angry, injured victim who knew someone tried to kill them. Poison was the fantasy method. Silent, distant, no direct confrontation. In reality, poison was nearly impossible for medieval assassins to use effectively. Acquiring poison required specialized knowledge or access to apothecaries. Hemlock, belladonna, arsenic, these weren't sold openly. You'd have to know which plants to harvest, how to prepare them, what dosages were lethal. Then you'd have to administer the poison without being detected. This meant access to your target's food or drink, which meant infiltrating their household as a servant or bribing someone with access. All of this required time, knowledge, and money that most assassins lacked. The few poison assassinations that occurred in medieval Europe were typically commissioned by nobility who had the resources to acquire and administer poison properly. Street-level assassins used blades and clubs because those were the tools available. The waiting periods between contracts were psychologically destructive in ways the actual murders weren't. At least during a job, you were focused. Alert. Your mind was occupied with planning and survival. Between jobs, you had nothing but time. Time to remember. Time to remember. Time to regret. Time to imagine all the ways your next job might go wrong. Some assassins tried to stay busy, took temporary labor jobs, helped in stables, did anything to occupy their minds. But steady work required staying in one place, which was dangerous, and explaining gaps in your work history raised questions you couldn't answer. Where were you the last 3 months, murdering people in other towns? Not something you could say. So mostly you drifted, moved from tavern to tavern, town to town, always alone, always waiting for the next contract or the next arrest. The few assassins who tried to maintain relationships discovered it was impossible. How do you explain your lifestyle to a romantic partner? Where is your money from? Why do you disappear for weeks? Why do you wake up screaming? Why are there scars on your hands? Why won't you talk about your past? The lies required to maintain a relationship were unsustainable. Eventually, you'd slip up, say something incriminating, or your partner would notice inconsistencies and start asking harder questions. Some assassins fell in love, tried to hide their profession, tried to be normal. It never worked. Either they confessed, horrifying their partner and ending the relationship, or they were caught and their partner discovered the truth in the worst possible way. Romantic relationships required trust and honesty. Assassins could provide neither. Friendships were similarly impossible. Real friendships required vulnerability, sharing your life, your struggles, your fears. You couldn't do that. Couldn't tell anyone what you really did. Couldn't explain where your scars came from. Couldn't be honest about why you were always moving. So your friendships were shallow, surface level. Drinking buddies who knew nothing about you. People you talked to in taverns but would never see again. No depth, no meaning, no real connection. The isolation was absolute. You were surrounded by people, but completely alone, always performing normalcy while hiding the horror underneath. The one-way ticket nature of becoming an assassin was perhaps its cruelest aspect. Once you'd killed for money once, you were an assassin. Forever. Even if you stopped taking contracts, even if you tried to reform, you'd still murdered people for pay. That fact never changed, never went away. Your past was permanent and damning. Some assassins had moments of clarity where they realized they destroyed their own lives, committed acts so heinous that redemption was impossible. These moments of awareness were devastating. You couldn't undo what you'd done, couldn't make amends, couldn't apologize to your victims or their families. You could only continue existing with the knowledge of what you'd become. Some assassins couldn't bear it, chose execution over living with themselves, confessed to authorities, asked to be arrested and killed. Death as relief from the unbearable weight of their sins. The younger you were when you started, the more murders you'd likely commit before dying. A 15-year-old who became an assassin might survive until 25 if he was lucky and careful. That is 10 years. Maybe 20 to 30 murders across a decade, each one adding to the psychological burden. Each one making you less human. Older assassins had shorter careers but carried less total death. A 30-year-old who became an assassin might only survive 2 or 3 years. Maybe 5 to 10 murders total before something killed him. Neither path was good. But starting young meant more years of horror, more ghosts, more psychological damage. Young assassins who survived into their 30s were so psychologically broken, they barely resembled functional humans. They were trauma given form. Horror stories walking around in human skin. Medieval assassins understood that they were damned, not metaphorically, literally damned. The medieval worldview was explicitly religious. Heaven and hell were real places you went after death. Murder was a mortal sin. Multiple murders meant hell, certain, unavoidable, eternal. You weren't theoretically damned, you were factually damned. This knowledge sat heavy on medieval assassins. Some stopped caring about earthly consequences because they knew they were going to hell anyway. Might as well enjoy their limited time alive. Others became desperate for salvation, sought any possible path to redemption, gave all their money to churches, made pilgrimages, begged for forgiveness. The church taught that sincere repentance could save anyone. But how sincere is repentance when you keep committing the same sin? When you murder someone, repent, then murder someone else. The theological gymnastics required to believe in your own salvation, while continuing to assassinate, became too complex. Most assassins eventually accepted damnation as inevitable, stopped fighting it, stopped hoping, just waited for hell with grim resignation. The impact on medieval society of having professional assassins was subtle but real. Business disputes became more dangerous. Owing money to the wrong person could get you killed. Romantic rivalries turned deadly. Inheritance conflicts solved themselves through convenient deaths. The existence of murder for hire changed social dynamics. People were more cautious, more paranoid, trusted less, avoided making enemies. The fear of assassination was disproportionate to the actual risk. Most people would never be assassinated, but the fear existed nonetheless. Medieval assassins were a visible reminder that life was cheap and death was available for purchase. This knowledge poisoned relationships and communities, turned neighbors into potential threats, made society a slightly darker, more paranoid place. Church efforts to combat assassination were largely ineffective. Excommunication was supposed to be a deterrent. If you murdered someone, you'd be excommunicated, denied sacraments, condemned to hell. This mattered to religious people, but assassins had usually already abandoned religious concerns. Threats of hell didn't deter people who'd accepted their damnation. The church could investigate and report suspected assassins to secular authorities, which they sometimes did. But secular authorities were often complicit in assassination. Nobles hired assassins frequently. Local lords looked the other way when murder removed inconvenient people. The legal system was corrupt and inconsistent. The church's moral authority only went so far when secular power ignored or enabled assassination. Some regions tried deterrence through spectacular public executions. Make the death of assassins so horrific that potential assassins would think twice, breaking on the wheel, drawing, and quartering. Boiling alive. These execution methods were designed to maximize suffering and public spectacle. Did they work? Number because people desperate enough to become assassins weren't deterred by threats of future punishment. They were focused on immediate survival. Death by execution in 10 years seemed abstract and distant. Starvation tomorrow seemed immediate and real. Hunger was a more powerful motivator than fear. Medieval assassins knew they'd probably die horribly. They became assassins anyway because the alternative was dying horribly from hunger or exposure. The choice wasn't between assassination and a good life. It was between assassination and a different kind of death. The geography of medieval Europe affected assassination patterns. Some regions had stronger law enforcement and more severe penalties, reducing assassination frequency. Other regions were lawless and chaotic, making assassination common. The Holy Roman Empire, with its complex patchwork of jurisdictions, was particularly problematic. An assassin could commit murder in one prince's territory, flee to another prince's territory, and be effectively unreachable. Jurisdictional disputes meant criminals often escaped prosecution simply by crossing borders. France had somewhat better centralized justice, at least in theory. England's system was stronger still, though far from perfect. Italy's city-states each had different laws and different levels of enforcement. Milan was notorious for political assassinations. Venice had its own secret police and was relatively effective at catching criminals. Geography and jurisdiction made assassination easier in some places and harder in others. The seasonal patterns of assassination work followed predictable cycles. Spring and summer saw increased contracts as people had money from harvests and trade. Autumn was busy as people settled disputes before winter. Winter was slow as everyone focused on survival. This meant assassins had to save money from spring and summer to survive winter. Many couldn't or didn't. They spent earnings as fast as they got them. Then winter came and they were desperate. Some turned to robbery, some begged, some starved, some froze to death. The inability to plan financially killed as many assassins as law enforcement did. The relationship between organized crime and individual assassins was complicated. Organized criminal groups, smuggling rings, large-scale theft operations, black market networks occasionally needed assassins. But they preferred not to work with lone wolf assassins. Too unpredictable, too likely to get caught and inform on others. Criminal organizations that needed murders committed usually had their own members do it. Using your own people meant better control and less risk of betrayal. The lone assassins who survived longest were the ones who stayed independent, didn't join organizations, didn't develop permanent partnerships, worked alone, lived alone, died alone. The independence was isolating, but safer than trusting criminal organizations who'd eliminate you the moment you became inconvenient. Medieval law recognized degrees of murder, but applied execution fairly uniformly. Killing in self-defense was technically different from premeditated assassination. Accidental killing was different from both. But in practice, if you killed someone and got caught, you were probably getting executed regardless of circumstances. The legal nuance mattered for determining whether you could claim benefit of clergy or trial by combat. But these options were rarely available to obvious criminals. If you were a stranger in town, standing over a body with a bloody knife, claiming self-defense wouldn't help. You'd be executed immediately, or after a brief show trial. The legal system had little interest in protecting criminals' rights. Guilt was often determined by appearance and circumstance, rather than evidence and testimony. The economic impact of assassination on medieval communities was real, but unquantifiable. Every murdered merchant was a disruption to trade. Every killed craftsman was lost productivity. The fear of assassination likely influenced business decisions. Did you pursue that profitable contract if it meant making an enemy who might hire an assassin? Did you aggressively collect debts knowing the debtor might kill you? Risk assessment included murder as a real possibility. This must have had a chilling effect on economic activity, though measuring it is impossible. We can only note that assassination existed, was common enough to be a recognized social phenomenon, and therefore must have influenced behavior in ways that affected the economy. Let's return to the individual experience. You are an assassin who has survived 3 years. That is remarkable. Most of your peers are dead. You've killed maybe 15 people. You are 27 years old but look 45. Your hands shake. You drink too much. You have nightmares every night. You can't remember what you looked like before you started this work. Can't remember who you were. The person you used to be is gone, murdered by the same process that turned you into a murderer. You have no future, no hope, no plan, except continuing until something kills you. This is your life. This is what you've become, and there is no way back. You are in a tavern in a town whose name you don't remember. You've been drunk for 2 days, spent your last coins on ale. There is a man at the next table watching you. You don't notice until he sits down across from you. He wants to talk. Has a job. Someone needs to die. The pay is 20 silver coins. 20, that is generous. Also suspicious. Either the target is particularly difficult, or the employer is rich enough not to haggle. You should ask questions. Learn more. Be cautious. Instead, you agree immediately, because you need the money. Because this is what you do. Because you stop making careful decisions, somewhere around murder number 7. The man tells you the details. A merchant's wife. She needs to die. Make it look like an accident. The man gives you an advance. 5 silver coins. You pocket them. Ask when. Soon, he says. Within a week. Then he leaves. You sit alone, staring at your ale, wondering if this will be the job that gets you caught. Probably not. You've thought that before. You are still here. Still alive. Still killing. So you'll do this job. And probably the next one. Until finally one day you are wrong and something kills you. But not today. Today you are alive. Today you are alive. Today you are an assassin. Tomorrow you'll start planning how to murder a woman you've never met. This is your life. This is who you are. And you've forgotten how to be anything else. The specific challenges of targeting women were different from targeting men. Women in medieval society had less freedom of movement. They rarely walked alone. Were usually accompanied by servants, children, or family members. This made creating opportunities more difficult. You couldn't just wait in an alley and ambush them. You had to infiltrate their domestic spaces, or find the rare moments when they were vulnerable. Some assassins took positions as servants in wealthy households, worked for weeks or months as a stable hand or kitchen helper, learned the household routines, found access points, then struck when the moment came. This required patience and the ability to maintain a false identity under scrutiny. Not skills most assassins possessed. The merchant's wife contract required more planning than usual. Her name was Catherine, age 35, mother of 4. No obvious reason anyone would want her dead, except that her husband was remarrying and she was inconvenient. You spent a week observing. Catherine rarely left her home. When she did, it was to attend church or visit the market, always accompanied by a servant or one of her children. Her routine was predictable, but offered no obvious vulnerabilities. Direct assault was impossible. There were always witnesses. You needed another approach. The house had a garden in the rear. High walls provided privacy. Catherine visited the garden daily in late afternoon to tend her herb plants, usually alone for about 15 minutes while servants prepared dinner. The garden accessed a back alley through a small gate, locked but old. The lock could be picked, or forced. This was your opportunity. Break into the garden during her daily visit. Kill her quickly. Exit through the alley. If anyone discovered the body immediately, you'd be long gone. If nobody discovered her for minutes or hours, you'd be leagues away before the alarm was raised. The day of the attempt, you positioned yourself in the alley near the garden gate. Mid-afternoon. The timing had to be precise. Too early, and she wouldn't be there yet. Too late, and servants might interrupt. You waited, heart pounding, hands sweating, despite the cool air. This never gets easier. Every assassination feels like the first. The same fear. The same knowledge that you are about to commit an unforgivable act. But you need the money, and you've committed so many unforgivable acts already that one more doesn't change your damnation status. You are already going to hell. Might as well have coin to spend before you get there. You heard movement in the garden. Female voice humming. Catherine. You forced the gate lock. The old wood splintered easily. Too easily. The crack was loud. You froze. Did she hear? The humming stopped. Silence, then footsteps approaching the gate. She was investigating the noise. You could run, abort the mission, or you could commit. Push through and complete the job even though surprise was lost. You chose commitment. Hesitation gets you killed. You pushed the gate open. Catherine was standing 5 feet away, looking directly at you. Her expression shifted from curiosity to fear in half a second. She opened her mouth to scream. You rushed forward, grabbed her, one hand over her mouth, the other reaching for your knife. She bit your hand hard, drew blood. You cursed, held on, got the knife out. She was thrashing, stronger than expected, trying to break free. Kicking at your legs, you couldn't hold her and stab her effectively. She broke partially free. Screamed. Not loudly. You'd managed to partially muffle it, but loud enough that someone might have heard. You had seconds, maybe less. You stabbed her in the chest. The blade struck ribs, didn't penetrate deeply. She screamed again, louder. You stabbed again. Throat this time. Blood sprayed. She fell. You fell with her. Both of you crashing into her herb garden. Your knife was stuck in her throat. You pulled it out. More blood. So much blood. Catherine was making gurgling sounds, drowning in her own blood. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Beseeching. She was dying. You'd killed her, but not quickly, not cleanly. She was suffering. You should finish it. Stab her again to end it faster. But you heard voices from the house. Servants calling out. They'd heard the screams. They were coming. You ran, didn't bother with the gate, vaulted the garden wall, dropped into the alley on the other side, hit the ground hard. Your ankle twisted. Pain shot up your leg, ignored it. Limped away as fast as you could. Behind you, screaming. Catherine's screams had stopped. She was dead or dying. The servants' screams were just starting. They'd found her. They'd sound the alarm. You had minutes to get out of town. Minutes before guards would be searching for a blood-covered stranger with a limp. You made it to where you'd hidden your travel pack earlier that day. Changed shirts. Tried to clean the blood off your hands and face using water from a public well. Couldn't get it all. Your hands still had blood under the nails. Your sleeve was stained. But it was better than before. Good enough to pass casual inspection. Not good enough for close scrutiny. You needed to leave. Now, but your ankle was injured. Each step sent pain shooting through your leg. You couldn't run. Could barely walk normally. This was bad. Really bad. You were injured, and the town was in lockdown. Guards would be checking everyone leaving, looking for anyone suspicious. A limping stranger with blood on his clothes would be arrested immediately. You hid in an abandoned building outside town. Waited for darkness. The ankle swelled. Turned purple. Possibly broken. Definitely sprained. You couldn't put weight on it without excruciating pain. Your escape plan was falling apart. The original idea was to be miles away before the body was discovered. Instead, you were hiding half a mile from the murder scene, injured and trapped. You'd failed. Not completely. Catherine was dead, but you'd failed to escape cleanly. Now, you were a wounded animal, waiting for hunters to find you. Night fell. You moved under cover of darkness, limped through fields, avoiding roads where guards would be patrolling. Each step was agony. Your ankle screamed. But you kept moving, put distance between yourself and the town. By dawn, you'd made perhaps 5 miles. Pathetic progress, but better than staying. You found a barn, hid in the hayloft, passed out from pain and exhaustion. Woke hours later to voices below. Farmers, you stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, praying they wouldn't come up to the loft. They didn't. They finished their work and left. You exhaled, safe for now, but still trapped, still injured, still in the region where people were looking for Catherine's killer. You stayed in that barn for 3 days. Your ankle slowly improved. The swelling went down. You could put some weight on it. Not much, but enough to walk slowly without collapsing. The farmer's wife left food in the barn for the workers. Bread, cheese, apples. You stole portions, small enough that she might not notice. Enough to keep you alive. This was survival. Base, animal survival. No dignity, no plan. Just hiding and healing, and hoping not to be discovered. After 5 days you risked moving again, travelled at night, stayed off main roads, avoided towns. Your ankle was better but still weak. You couldn't fight effectively, couldn't run. If guards found you, you were dead. The paranoia was all-consuming. Every sound was pursuit, every distant light was a search party. Every person you saw from a distance was a guard coming to arrest you. You were hunted, wounded, terrified. It took 2 weeks to reach the meeting point where you were supposed to collect final payment. Your employer was furious. You were late. You were supposed to make Catherine's death look like an accident. Instead, she was obviously murdered in her own garden. The entire region was in uproar. Guards were investigating. Your employer was under suspicion because they'd publicly argued with Catherine's husband weeks earlier. They told you the job was botched, sloppy. Amateur, they threw the remaining 15 silver coins at you. Told you never to contact them again. Told you to leave this region entirely. You were a liability. If caught, you better not mention their name, or they'd make sure your execution was particularly slow. You took the coins, limped away. You'd completed the contract, but barely. You'd nearly been caught, nearly died. Your ankle would probably never fully heal. You'd walk with a slight limp forever now, a permanent reminder of this job, of Catherine, of her frightened eyes as she died in her herb garden. Another ghost added to your collection, another scar added to your body. Another reason you'd be easier to identify if authorities ever compiled descriptions of suspects. That was 5 months ago. The ankle healed enough to be functional. The limp is barely noticeable now. Unless you walk for extended periods, then it becomes obvious. You are in a different region, different kingdom, far enough from Catherine's murder that nobody connects you to it. You've taken 3 more contracts since then, all successful, all cleaner than the Catherine job. You learned from that disaster, better planning, better escape routes, no more garden ambushes. Stick to what works, wait for opportunities, strike fast. Escape immediately, the old methods, the reliable methods. You are sitting in another tavern, in another nameless town. You have 30 silver coins, saved, more than you've ever had at once. You could stop, take a year off, find legitimate work. Try to leave this life. You think about it sometimes. Imagine what it would be like to sleep without nightmares, to interact with people without fear they'll discover what you are, to build something instead of destroying, to create instead of killing. But it is fantasy. You know this. You are too damaged, too marked by your crimes, too far gone. The legitimate world won't take you back, doesn't want you, wouldn't trust you. You are an assassin. That is your identity, your profession, your purpose. Stopping means confronting what you've become, means facing the full weight of your sins without the distraction of planning the next job. Stopping means looking at yourself honestly, and what you'd see would destroy you, so you don't stop. You find the next contract. Accept it. Begin planning. Because working means not feeling. Being an assassin means not having to be human. And after what you've done, humanity seems like something you lost the right to claim years ago. The other assassins you've encountered over the years were all similar. Broken people clinging to violence because they had nothing else. You've crossed paths with perhaps a dozen in your travels. Recognized each other instinctively. The way you carry yourselves. The watchfulness. The isolation. The barely concealed desperation. Sometimes you'd share a drink. Never share names. Never ask direct questions. Just sit in silence. 2 predators acknowledging each other's existence. Some were older, barely functional, waiting to die. Others were newer, still had some spark, still believed they might survive long enough to escape. You knew better. They'd die like everyone else in this profession, violently, alone, unmourned. But you didn't tell them that. Let them keep their hope. It would be stripped away soon enough by reality. One assassin you met was a woman, rare enough that you remembered her years later. She was maybe 40, covered in scars, missing 2 fingers on her left hand. She'd been working for 20 years, 20. That was unheard of. The survival rate for 20 years was effectively 0. You asked how she'd managed. She laughed. Bitter, harsh sound. Luck, she said. Sheer, stupid luck. And paranoia. And willingness to walk away from jobs that felt wrong. She'd turned down more contracts than she'd accepted. Only took work where success probability was very high. This meant less income, long gaps between jobs, but it meant staying alive. She was living proof that extreme caution could extend your lifespan in this profession. She was also living proof that extending your lifespan meant extending your suffering. 20 years of murder, 20 years of isolation, 20 years of nightmares. She looked ancient, moved like someone in constant pain, drank herself into oblivion every night to sleep. You asked if she'd do it again, given the choice. She thought about it, then said yes, because the alternative was starving to death at 20. At least this way she'd survived. At least she was still here, even if here meant being a broken murder machine in her 40s. It was survival. That counted for something. You weren't sure you agreed. But you didn't argue. Everyone justifies their choices differently. You never saw her again after that meeting. Don't know if she is still alive. Probably not. 20 years was impressive. 21 would be miraculous. More likely she took one job too many. Got caught. Got killed, ended up in an unmarked grave or dangling from a gibbet in some town square. That is the ending for all assassins eventually. The only variable is when. How many years? How many murders? How much suffering before the inevitable conclusion? The contemplation of suicide was constant among medieval assassins. Not active planning, just persistent awareness that ending yourself was an option. Maybe the only way to escape. You couldn't quit, couldn't reform, couldn't be redeemed, but you could end it. Quick blade across your throat, step off a cliff. Drink enough poison. Simple. Final. The thoughts came most frequently during the long empty periods between contracts. when you were alone with your memories and your ghosts, when the full horror of what you'd become crashed down. Some assassins followed through, chose death over continuing, found their bodies weeks later. Nobody mourned them. Nobody cared. Just another dead criminal. Probably better off. Certainly better than the alternative of getting caught and executed slowly. You've considered it. Of course you have. Every assassin considers it eventually. The appeal of just ending the cycle. No more contracts, no more murders, no more fear, no more guilt. Just darkness, peace. But something stops you every time. Maybe survival instinct, maybe cowardice. Afraid to face whatever comes after death. Maybe stubborn refusal to let the world win. You are not sure. You just know that despite everything, despite the horror and the damage and the certainty of damnation, you keep choosing to live. Keep taking contracts. Keep killing. Keep existing in this twilight state between human and monster. You don't know why. Don't examine it too closely. Just accept it as fact. You are still here, still breathing, still an assassin. For now, until something changes, until something ends you, or until you finally find the courage to end yourself. The lasting impact of medieval assassins on society was more psychological than practical. The actual number of assassination murders was relatively small compared to other causes of death. Disease, accidents, warfare, common crime, all killed far more people. But assassination held outsized space in the medieval imagination. The idea that anyone with enough money could arrange your death. That strangers might be watching you, learning your routine, planning your murder. This paranoia infected medieval culture, changed behavior, made people more guarded, more suspicious, less trusting. The existence of assassins, even if you'd never personally encounter one, made the world feel less safe, more unpredictable, more hostile. Medieval literature and religious texts condemned assassination in the strongest terms. Murder for hire was portrayed as the ultimate sin. Worse than simple murder because it combined multiple evils. Murder itself, greed, premeditation, and corrupting others to sin. Assassins in medieval stories were always eventually caught and punished. Divine justice ensured their downfall. These stories served moral and practical purposes. They reinforced that assassination was wrong. They provided reassurance that evil would be punished. They gave society a narrative structure for understanding and categorizing this particular crime. But the stories were fiction. In reality, many assassins were never caught. Many murders went unsolved. Justice was inconsistent and often absent entirely. The stories provided comfort. Reality provided only cold statistics about unsolved murders and missing persons. The regional variations in assassination prevalence correlated with social stability and law enforcement effectiveness. Regions with weak central authority and frequent warfare had more assassins. Places where life was already cheap and violent, where one more murder barely registered. Regions with strong governance and effective justice systems had fewer assassins because the risk of capture and execution was much higher. But no region was completely free of assassination. Human conflicts existed everywhere. The desire to eliminate enemies existed everywhere. The willingness to pay for murder existed everywhere. So assassins existed everywhere, even if in smaller numbers in well-governed areas. The tools assassins used evolved slightly over the medieval period, but never dramatically. Knives and short blades remained standard because they were concealable and reliable. The introduction of better metalworking techniques meant better quality blades, but this didn't change fundamental assassination methods. A better knife killed people the same way a crude knife did. Poison knowledge improved somewhat, but remained largely inaccessible to street-level assassins. Crossbows existed, but were too large and distinctive to be practical for assassination. A man carrying a crossbow through town would be noticed and questioned. So the core tools remained simple and unchanged: blades, clubs, bare hands. The medieval assassin's toolkit in 1450 looked much like it did in 1150. Technology advanced. Assassination methods didn't. The few attempts to organize assassins into guilds or formal groups mostly failed. Assassins were by nature solitary and distrustful. Organizational structures required trust, hierarchy, rules. Assassins didn't do well with any of those. The Nizarias melees succeeded because they were religious and political movement first, assassination tool second. The religious ideology provided cohesion that pure criminal organization couldn't. In Europe, various criminal organizations sometimes included assassins, but they were never central members, always periphery, always disposable. The successful criminal organizations were smugglers and thieves who built networks based on mutual profit. Assassins threatened those networks by attracting law enforcement attention, so they were used sparingly, reluctantly, and quickly discarded after use. Your current situation mirrors every other medieval assassin situation. You are in a town. You are watching a target. You are planning murder. You'll probably succeed. You'll collect payment. You'll move to the next town. Take another contract. Kill again. The cycle continues until it doesn't, until you are caught or killed, until your luck runs out or your skills fail, until age or injury slows you enough that you can't escape, until one of 1,000 things that can go wrong finally does go wrong. The end is inevitable. The timing is uncertain. That uncertainty is perhaps the worst part. You know you are going to die badly. You just don't know when or how. So you exist in perpetual anticipation of your own doom, waiting for the blow that doesn't come, until finally, unexpectedly, it does. If there is a moral to the medieval assassin story, it is not about the assassins themselves, it is about the society that created them. A social system that left people so desperate that murder for hire seemed like viable employment created its own monsters. The assassins were symptoms. The disease was poverty, inequality, lack of social mobility, and a justice system that protected the wealthy while discarding the poor. Medieval assassins were human beings who fell through every crack in every safety net until they landed at the bottom where murder was the only option left. They made terrible choices, committed unforgivable acts, destroyed innocent lives. But they were created by the world they inhabited. A different world might have made them farmers or craftsmen. This world made them killers. The guilt lies with both. The individuals who chose murder and the society that made that choice seem rational. But philosophical analysis doesn't change the facts on the ground. Doesn't absolve personal responsibility. Doesn't bring back the victims. Medieval assassins were murderers. They killed people, destroyed families, spread fear and paranoia. Whatever systemic factors contributed to their existence doesn't erase their crimes. They deserve neither sympathy nor romanticization, just cold, factual acknowledgement. They existed, they killed, they suffered for it, they died badly. That is the story. That is the only story. No hidden nobility, no secret honor, no redemption arc, just desperate people committing horrible acts for terrible reasons until something killed them. That is the miserable truth of being a medieval assassin. And with that truth established, with the myths destroyed, and the reality laid bare, you can stop imagining yourself in that position. Stop thinking about how you'd handle it, because you wouldn't. You'd die in the first week. Most people would. The tiny percentage who survived longer weren't tougher or smarter. They were luckier and more willing to abandon their humanity. That is not an admirable trait. That is not something to aspire to. Medieval assassins weren't admirable. They were cautionary tales. Warnings about what happens when society fails people and people fail themselves. And now you know, the real version. The unglamorous, horrifying, true version, where nobody's cool, nobody's heroic, nobody escapes, and everybody loses. That was medieval assassination. That was the life. And it was exactly as miserable as it sounds. But let's drill down further into specific failures, because those are the stories that don't get told. The assassinations that went wrong in spectacular ways. The jobs where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. These stories illustrate just how precarious and desperate this profession really was. Take the case of an assassin hired to kill a minor noble in 1340s Germany. The assassin spent 2 months planning, found the perfect spot for an ambush on a road. The noble travelled weekly. Everything was prepared. Then, on the day of the attempt, the noble didn't show. He'd changed his plans last minute. The assassin waited all day. Nothing. He'd spent his entire advance on preparation and had nothing to show for it. No payment would come because no murder occurred. He'd wasted 2 months. And all his money. Worse, the noble now had extra guards because someone had warned him about a possible threat. The contract was impossible to complete. The assassin fled the region, destitute and marked as incompetent. Last known sighting had him begging in a different town before disappearing from records. Probably died of starvation or exposure. That is what failure looked like. Not dramatic, just quietly catastrophic. Another case from 1290s England involved an assassin who successfully completed his contract, but was betrayed by his employer. The assassin killed a wealthy merchant, as agreed, collected his payment. Then the employer immediately informed authorities describing the assassin in detail, and claiming the assassin had acted independently, possibly as a robbery gone wrong. The employer presented themselves as a concerned citizen, helping solve a murder. The assassin was caught 2 days later. Under torture, he revealed who'd hired him. But the employer had influential friends who ensured the accusation wasn't pursued. The assassin was executed. The employer faced no consequences. This betrayal pattern was common enough that experienced assassins developed elaborate precautions, anonymous meetings, disguises never revealing real names. But these precautions only worked if you remembered to use them. One mistake and you were betrayed, arrested, and killed while your employer walked free. There were cases of mistaken identity that turned tragic. An assassin hired to kill a specific merchant in a crowded market. The assassin's target description was vague. Tall man with a beard wearing blue. The assassin identified someone matching that description, followed him, waited for an opportunity. Struck, killed him, then discovered the victim was the wrong person, a stranger who happened to match the description. The real target was somewhere else in the market. The assassin had just committed a murder that served no purpose and wouldn't result in payment. Worse, the investigation now had a body and witnesses. The assassin fled immediately, but was caught 3 days later, executed for murdering an innocent person while never completing the actual contract. The employer found another assassin who did the job properly. The first assassin's name was forgotten except as an execution record. A life ended for a mistake that benefited no one. Equipment failures were more common than you'd think. Knives breaking at crucial moments. Blades that weren't sharp enough. Rope that snapped when trying to strangle someone. An assassin in 1360s Italy tried to poison a target but mixed the poison incorrectly. The target got sick but didn't die. Became suspicious. Increased security. The assassin's employer was implicated and arrested. Under torture, the employer gave up the assassin's description. The assassin fled to another region, but was recognized months later by someone who'd seen the wanted posters, arrested, tortured, executed. All because the poison was mixed wrong. Technical competence mattered enormously, and most assassins had no technical training. They learned by doing, and sometimes what they learned was that they'd done it wrong, and now they were caught. Weather disrupted countless assassination attempts. A carefully planned ambush ruined by unexpected rain that delayed the target's travel. A poisoning attempt foiled when hot weather made the poison too obvious. Tracking a target through snow that left clear footprints for guards to follow back to you. Medieval people had no weather forecasting. You planned based on typical seasonal patterns and hoped. When weather didn't cooperate, entire plans collapsed. Some assassins had the flexibility to adapt. Most didn't. They'd invested all their time and money into one approach. When it failed, they had no backup. No alternate plan. Just failure and poverty and desperation. The psychological breakdown of assassins happened in stages. First stage was rationalization. This is just temporary. I'll do this until I get enough money, then quit. This stage lasted through the first few murders. You convinced yourself you were in control. This was a choice. You could stop any time. The second stage was habituation. The murders became routine. Less emotionally impactful. You dissociated during the act. Went through the motions mechanically. This was when you were most effective, but also when your humanity started eroding noticeably. Third stage was breakdown. The dissociation stopped working. The guilt crashed in. The nightmares became unbearable. Some assassins stopped at this stage through suicide or complete psychological collapse. Fourth stage was transformation. You became something else, not quite human anymore. A mechanism for killing, empty inside, going through the motions of life without really living. This final stage could last years. You were functional but hollow, a ghost haunting your own body. Some assassins reached this stage. It wasn't survival. It was something worse than death, continuing to exist without any reason to exist. The comparison between medieval European assassins and their Middle Eastern counterparts is instructive. The Nizari Ismailis, the original assassins, operated from fortified bases, had support structures, acted on ideological principles rather than pure economic desperation. Their missions were political. They targeted specific high-value individuals for strategic reasons. European assassins had none of that. No ideology except survival. No support structure except maybe 1 or 2 criminal contacts. No strategic thinking. Just whoever paid and whoever needed to die. The Middle Eastern assassins could see themselves as soldiers or believers. European assassins couldn't kid themselves. They were just murderers. The legal evolution around assassination penalties showed how seriously medieval authorities took this crime. Early medieval law treated assassination as just another murder. But by the high medieval period, assassination was punished more severely. Premeditation plus payment constituted aggravating factors. Some regions passed specific anti-assassination laws. Hiring an assassin carried the same penalty as being the assassin. Death. This legal evolution reflected society's increasing horror at murder. For hire. It wasn't personal anger or passion. It was cold, calculated killing for profit. That combination violated medieval moral sensibilities deeply. The law responded by making punishments as horrific as possible, trying to deter through fear. It didn't work. People still hired assassins. Assassins still took contracts. The death penalty didn't prevent assassination any more than it prevented other crimes, because the people becoming assassins had already accepted their eventual execution as inevitable. You couldn't deter someone with death when they'd already resigned themselves to dying. Let's address the elephant in the room. Did any medieval assassins actually escape and live peaceful lives? The historical record suggests almost none. A few documented cases exist of criminals reforming, but none specifically identified as assassins. The stigma was too strong, the skills too specialized, the psychological damage too severe. An assassin might stop taking contracts, but they couldn't erase their past, couldn't unlearn what they'd learned, couldn't forget what they'd done. Some probably faded into obscurity, became beggars or hermits, lived out their remaining years in anonymous poverty. That is not escape, that is just slower dying. True escape would mean reintegrating into society, building a new identity, finding legitimate work, having relationships. None of this was realistically available to someone with years of murder in their past. The trauma alone would prevent it. You can't casually chat with neighbors when you've killed 15 people. Can't maintain employment when you wake up screaming. Can't trust anyone when your entire survival has depended on trusting no one. Escape was a fantasy assassins told themselves. Reality was continuing until death. The children of known or suspected assassins faced generational trauma. If your father was executed as an assassin, your family inherited his shame. People remembered. Small medieval communities had long memories. Your father murdered people. That was your family legacy. It affected marriage prospects, employment opportunities, social standing, everything. Some families changed their names and moved, started fresh somewhere else, built new identities. But moving required money and connections most assassins' families didn't have. So mostly they stayed, endured the whispers, the suspicion, the permanent mark of being the murderer's child. Medieval society believed in inherited sin. Your father's crimes stained you. Not legally. You couldn't be executed for his crimes. But socially, you were permanently othered, forever suspect. The sins of the father visited upon the children, literally. The economic impact of a single assassination rippled through medieval communities in unexpected ways. A murdered merchant meant interrupted trade. Goods not delivered. Contracts not fulfilled. A murdered craftsman meant services unavailable. A murdered farmer meant fields untended. Medieval economies were local and interconnected. Every person's labor mattered. Removing someone disrupted the entire system. Assassinations weren't just personal tragedies. They were economic disruptions. This is partly why communities took them so seriously. Murder violated the social contract. Assassination violated it more egregiously, because it was premeditated and external. Someone from outside the community, killing one of its members for money. This external threat violated community integrity, made everyone less safe. So communities responded harshly to suspected assassins. Not just because murder was wrong, but because assassins threatened the community's existence. Religious orders attempted to rehabilitate captured assassins sometimes. Offer them a chance at redemption through monastic life. Confess your sins. Repent. Spend your remaining years in prayer and penance. Save your soul even if your body was forfeit. A few assassins accepted this option when offered. Most didn't, partly because monastic life required discipline and submission they couldn't provide. Partly because even monks couldn't escape their pasts. The other monks would know what you'd done. You'd be forever the murderer who sought refuge in the church. Your presence would make others uncomfortable. Your confessions would horrify the priests who heard them, and ultimately you'd still be going to hell. The church taught that true repentance could save anyone, but it also taught that sins must be atoned for. How do you atone for multiple murders? The math didn't work. Finite life, infinite sin. Some assassins tried. None succeeded in finding peace. They just exchanged violent death for slow death behind monastery walls. Neither option was good. Both were just different flavors of hopelessness. The trajectory of the typical medieval assassin's career shows predictable patterns. Year 1, high anxiety, frequent mistakes, several close calls, barely surviving. If you made it past Year 1, you'd learn basic competence. Year 2, growing confidence, taking more contracts, making money. This was the most productive period. You knew enough to be effective but hadn't deteriorated yet. Year 3, beginning of decline. Psychological toll, mounting, physical injuries, accumulating. Year 4 and beyond, rapid deterioration. If you made it this long, you were either extremely lucky or extremely broken. The lucky ones died quickly in botched jobs. The broken ones continued declining until they were too damaged to function, at which point they died from poverty, exposure, or deliberately getting themselves killed. Almost no one made it to Year 5. The few who did were barely recognizable as human. Now let's address the ultimate question this examination raises. What does the existence of medieval assassins tell us about human nature? That people will do terrible things to survive. That poverty and desperation can override moral conditioning. That society creates the conditions for its own cancers. That individual choice and systemic failure are both real and both matter. Medieval assassins weren't inherently evil. They were ordinary people pushed into extraordinary circumstances who made terrible choices. They weren't victims. They murdered innocent people, but they weren't pure villains either. They were created by systems that failed them. The moral complexity is uncomfortable. We want clear villains and victims. Medieval assassins resist that simplification. They were both, and neither. They were human, flawed, broken, desperate humans, doing inhuman things for human reasons. That is the most disturbing part. Not that they were monsters, that they were people like us, put in circumstances extreme enough that murder seemed rational. That is the lesson. That is the warning. Not about assassins specifically, about what humans become when pushed far enough. And that brings us to the end. The real, unglamorous, horrifying end. Most medieval assassins died violently before age 30, killed by victims who fought back, executed after being caught, assassinated by employers tying up loose ends, murdered by rival criminals. The few who survived longer died of infections, exposure, starvation, or deliberate self-destruction. None died peacefully. None died surrounded by loved ones. None died with dignity. They died alone, in pain, afraid, unmourned. Their bodies were displayed as warnings or dumped in unmarked graves. Their names were forgotten. Their lives erased from history. That is the ending. Not dramatic final stands. Not redemptive sacrifices. Just quiet, lonely, meaningless deaths. One day you are alive. The next you are not. No one cares. No one remembers. You were a murderer. You are dead now. The world moves on without you like you never existed, because you didn't matter. You were disposable. A tool used and discarded. That is how medieval assassins ended. Every single one of them. Without exception. So when you watch your next movie about cool assassins in leather outfits doing parkour, remember this. Remember the real version, the medieval version, where assassins were desperate, broken criminals, where they lived in fear and died in agony, where they destroyed themselves as thoroughly as they destroyed their victims, where there were no winners, no redemption arcs, no happy endings, just misery, violence, and death. That was real assassination. That was the miserable truth. And now you know better than to romanticize it. Because there is nothing romantic about slowly destroying yourself while destroying others. Nothing cool about being a hunted animal. Nothing admirable about trading your humanity for silver coins. Medieval assassins were tragic figures, but not in the heroic sense. In the pathetic sense. They were people who made terrible choices, suffered terrible consequences, and left nothing behind but corpses and cautionary tales. That is the truth. The whole, brutal, miserable truth. And that is where we'll leave it. But before we close completely, let's examine one final dimension. The voices of the victims. Because they're the ones who truly paid the price for this profession's existence. Every assassination destroyed multiple lives. The victim, obviously, but also their family, their community, their dependents. A murdered merchant left a widow and children without income. A murdered craftsman left apprentices without training. A murdered parent left children without guidance. The ripples extended far beyond the immediate death. The families of assassination victims lived with unanswered questions forever. Who killed my husband? Why? Who hired the assassin? Why did this happen to us? These questions had no answers. The assassin was usually never caught. The employer remained hidden. The motive stayed mysterious. The family had only the death itself. No context, no explanation, no justice. Just sudden, violent loss. The grief was compounded by the confusion. Random violence is traumatizing partly because it is incomprehensible. Your loved one went to market and never came home. Died in an alley, no one knows why. That uncertainty haunted families forever. Children orphaned by assassination grew up with trauma and poverty. A murdered father meant loss of income. Medieval widows had few employment options. The family's standard of living collapsed immediately. Children who would have learned a trade from their father instead went hungry. Daughters who would have had dowries had nothing. Sons who would have inherited businesses inherited debt and ruin. The economic devastation cascaded through generations. Assassination didn't just kill one person, it destroyed family lines, changed trajectories, created poverty where stability existed before. The communities surrounding assassination victims experienced collective trauma. If someone could be murdered seemingly at random, anyone could. The safety you thought you had vanished. People became more suspicious, more paranoid. Trust decreased. Social cohesion weakened. The assassin was long gone. The employer remained hidden, but the fear stayed, infected the community, changed how people interacted, made the world feel more dangerous, more hostile. Medieval communities were already difficult places to live. Assassination made them worse. Some families spent years seeking revenge, hired investigators, offered rewards for information, consulted with authorities, pursued every lead, usually fruitlessly. The assassin's trail was cold hours after the murder. Weeks later, it was impossible to follow. Years later, the assassin was probably dead anyway, killed by someone else, or executed for a different crime. The families seeking revenge found nothing. Their loved one's killer remained unknown. Their desire for justice remained unfulfilled. Eventually, they had to accept that they'd never know, never have closure, just live with the permanent wound of unexplained loss. The psychological impact on surviving family members varied. Some became consumed by grief and anger, spent their lives fixated on the murder, never moved past it. Others compartmentalized, accepted the loss and continued living, not because they didn't care, but because medieval life demanded it. You couldn't stop working to process trauma. You had to survive, had to earn money, had to take care of remaining family members. Grief was a luxury you couldn't afford, so you suppressed it, moved forward. The trauma didn't disappear. It just got buried under the necessity of survival. Children who witnessed their parents' assassination carried that trauma forever, saw their father stabbed, watched him die, screamed for help that didn't come fast enough. That kind of trauma doesn't heal. Not in medieval times without any concept of therapy or counselling. Those children grew up damaged. Some became violent themselves, the trauma expressing itself through aggression. Others became withdrawn, afraid of the world. None became whole, healthy adults. The assassination stole not just their parent but their childhood, their sense of safety, their ability to trust. They were casualties of a crime they didn't commit and couldn't prevent. The employers who hired assassins rarely felt guilt proportional to their crime. They'd outsourced the killing, kept their hands clean literally if not morally. They could convince themselves they weren't really murderers, they just paid someone else to do it. That mental distance let them sleep at night, let them continue living among the communities they'd harmed. Some employers were eventually caught and executed. Most weren't. They got away with it, lived normal lives, prospered sometimes, benefited from the murders they'd arranged. This injustice was perhaps the cruelest part. The assassin might die. The victim was certainly dead, but the person who initiated everything often escaped consequence entirely. The moral responsibility chain in assassination was deliberately obscured. The employer could blame the assassin. I just talked about wanting someone gone. I didn't actually tell them to kill anyone. The assassin could blame the employer. I was just following orders. I needed the money. Both could blame the victim. They must have done something to deserve it. This diffusion of responsibility let everyone avoid full accountability. But the reality was simple. 3 people were responsible. The employer who wanted the death, the assassin who performed the death, and the society that created conditions where murder for hire was viable. All three shared guilt. All three should have faced consequences. Usually, only the assassin did. If anyone did. Let's personalize this one final time. Imagine you are a merchant's 10-year-old son in 1350s Florence. Your father was murdered 3 months ago, stabbed in an alley. The killer was never caught. Your family has gone from comfortable to destitute. Your mother is trying to keep the business running, but she doesn't have your father's connections or credibility. Clients have left. Money is tight. You are hungry more often than not. You had to leave school because your mother can't afford the fees. You'll probably become a labourer instead of a merchant like your father planned. Your sister's marriage prospects are ruined because there is no dowry money. Your younger brother asks when father is coming home because at age 5, he doesn't fully understand death. You remember the funeral, the priest talking about God's plan. You don't understand God's plan. You just know your father is gone. Your life is ruined, and no one can explain why. That is what assassination did. That is the real cost. Not the assassin's suffering, though that was real. Not the employer's guilt, though that should have been real. The victims and their families. The people whose lives were destroyed for reasons they never understood. They paid the real price. And history barely remembers them. The documentation of assassination victims in medieval records is sparse and impersonal. John the Merchant was found dead, murderer unknown. That is it. John's decades of life, his relationships, his achievements, his value to his community, reduced to one line in a death registry. His wife's grief, his children's trauma, his business partner's losses unrecorded. History preserved the fact of the death, but not the impact of the death. We know medieval assassination happened. We don't know the full human cost because that cost wasn't considered worth recording. Medieval record, keeping prioritized property transactions and tax collections. Human suffering was background noise, so the victims of assassination disappeared twice. Once when they died, once when history forgot them. The few detailed accounts we have of assassination victims come from noble or wealthy families who had resources to demand investigations and record keeping. These accounts show the devastating impact on individuals and families, but they're not representative. Most assassination victims were ordinary people whose deaths weren't important enough for detailed documentation. The merchant with business rivals, the craftsman who knew too much, the wife who was inconvenient. These people died and were forgotten immediate families, and even their families eventually forgot the details, the names, the faces, the specific circumstances. Within 2 generations, the assassination victim was just a vague family story. Someone died badly once. That is all anyone remembered. Complete erasure. The comparison between medieval assassination's impact and modern murder's impact shows both continuity and change. Modern murder leaves more evidence, better forensics, higher solve rates. Families get more answers, but the trauma is similar. The loss is the same. The unanswered question still haunts survivors even when the killer is caught and convicted. The economic devastation still cascades through families. The community trauma still spreads. The difference is modern society has support systems, victim compensation funds, therapy support group. Medieval families had prayer and whatever help their community could spare, which usually wasn't much. The trauma was worse because the support was absent. Let's talk about one specific documented case. In 1398, a merchant named Thomas of York was assassinated by a hired killer. The assassination was discovered and investigated because Thomas was wealthy and well-connected. The investigation eventually caught the assassin. Under torture, the assassin revealed he'd been hired by Thomas's business partner, William. William wanted to seize control of their joint ventures. Thought killing Thomas was easier than negotiating a buyout. Both William and the assassin were executed. Justice was served, technically. But Thomas was still dead. His wife was still widowed. His 3 children were still fatherless. The business still collapsed because the partnership's dissolution destroyed client confidence. The family went from wealthy to struggling within a year. Justice didn't undo the damage. Didn't restore what was lost. It just added 2 more deaths to the pile. This case was unusual in that the killer and employer were caught. Usually neither were. But even in this best-case scenario, the outcome was still terrible for everyone except maybe the authorities, who got to demonstrate that law enforcement worked sometime. The long-term societal impact of routine assassination was subtle but significant. Medieval people lived with the knowledge that political, business, or personal conflicts might result in their death. This knowledge influenced behavior, made people more cautious, more secretive, less willing to stand out or make enemies. The chilling effect on medieval society is unquantifiable but real. How many business ventures didn't happen because merchants feared assassination? How many political reforms weren't pursued because reformers feared being killed? How many people just kept their heads down, avoiding anything that might make them targets? Assassination didn't just kill individual victims, it killed initiative, innovation, risk, taking. Medieval society was already conservative and risk-averse. The threat of assassination made it more so. Progress was slowed by fear. Society stagnated partly because doing anything noteworthy might get you killed. The assassins were symptoms of this dysfunction, but they also perpetuated it, created the fear that reinforced the conditions that created them. A vicious cycle that persisted for centuries. The Church's position on assassination evolved over the medieval period. Early medieval theology condemned murder, but didn't specifically address assassination as distinct from other killing. By the high medieval period, assassination was treated as particularly heinous. Premeditated murder for profit combined multiple sins: murder itself, greed, breach of commandment to love thy neighbour. Assassins who confessed were told their sins were grave, but forgivable through genuine repentance and extreme penance. Usually this meant spending remaining life in prayer and poverty, ideally in a monastery. Very few assassins took this option. Most were dead before they could consider it. The few who did usually found that repentance didn't erase guilt or trauma. They'd killed people. That fact was permanent. Prayer didn't change it. Penance didn't undo it. They just had to live with it until they died. The Church offered spiritual comfort but couldn't offer psychological healing. Medieval theology had no framework for processing the kind of trauma that serial murder created. So assassins who sought religious help found limited relief. Their souls might be theoretically saved. Their minds remained destroyed. Let's examine the economic calculation that medieval employers made when considering assassination. Hiring an assassin cost typically 10 to 50 silver coins, depending on the target's importance and the job's difficulty. Compare this to other options. Legal action could cost years of litigation and uncertain outcomes. Negotiation might require concessions you didn't want to make. Living with the conflict might mean ongoing losses or risks. Assassination was cheaper and more certain than alternatives. From a purely economic perspective, it made sense. This is why it persisted despite legal and moral prohibitions. The economics favoured murder when other options were expensive or unavailable. Medieval justice was slow, corrupt, and often inaccessible to ordinary people. If you had a serious problem and limited options, assassination might seem rational. This doesn't excuse it morally, but it explains why people kept hiring assassins despite knowing it was wrong. The alternatives were worse from their perspective. Medieval society created conditions where murder was sometimes the most efficient solution to problems. That is a damning indictment of how the society functioned. The training methods that naturally evolved among assassins show human ingenuity applied to horrific purposes. Assassins learned to move silently, to observe without being noticed, to identify vulnerabilities, to kill efficiently, to create false alibis, to dispose of evidence. This was specialized knowledge passed down through informal mentoring or learned through trial and error. The skills were sophisticated despite the practitioners being uneducated criminals, because humans are good at learning what they need to survive, and assassins needed to learn murder, craft to survive. They developed techniques through experimentation and experience. The most effective methods were remembered and taught. The least effective methods killed their practitioners and were forgotten. Natural selection operating on criminal technique. The result was a body of knowledge about how to kill people and escape consequences. This knowledge was never written down, couldn't be, existed only in the memories of practitioners, died with them when they were executed or killed. But while they lived, they possessed genuine expertise in their horrible profession. The psychological profile of successful long-term assassins shows common traits: high paranoia, extreme caution, willingness to abort missions if anything seemed wrong, emotional detachment, no permanent attachments to people or places. These traits weren't necessarily present before someone became an assassin. They developed as survival adaptations. The paranoid ones noticed threats early. The cautious ones avoided traps. The emotionally detached ones didn't hesitate during kills. The socially isolated ones couldn't be betrayed. Over time, The profession shaped practitioners, selected for certain psychological characteristics, made them more like each other, less like normal humans. The veteran assassins who'd survived years weren't representative of all assassins. They were the extreme outliers, the ones whose psychology or circumstances let them persist. Everyone else died early. So survivor assassins were a self-selected group of the most damaged, most adapted individuals. They weren't people you'd want to meet or be. The few recorded confessions from captured assassins provide disturbing insights into their mental states. Most expressed regret tinged with resignation. I killed them because I needed money. I regret it, but would probably do it again because I still need money. The honesty is chilling. They weren't pretending to be reformed, weren't claiming to have seen the light. Just acknowledging facts. I am a murderer. I'll probably always be a murderer. I am going to die for this. That is how it goes. The fatalism was absolute. Some confessions included requests for their families not to learn the full extent of their crimes. Tell them, I was a thief. Don't tell them about the murders. Others included apologies to specific victims' families. I am sorry I killed your husband. He seemed like a good man. I was just doing what I was paid to do. The apologies were sincere, but useless. Couldn't bring back the dead. Couldn't undo the harm. Just empty words from condemned men who'd realized too late that their choices had destroyed everyone, including themselves. Now finally we reach the absolute end. The final accounting medieval assassins existed. They killed people, they suffered. They died. Their victims suffered more. Society was worse for their existence. No one benefited except briefly the employers who hired them. And even employers often regretted their decisions eventually. The whole system was lows. The assassin lost their humanity and life. The victim lost their life. The victim's family lost their loved one. Society lost stability and trust. Everyone paid. No one gained anything lasting. Medieval assassination was pure destruction. No creation, no progress. No positive outcomes. Just death and suffering radiating outward from every crime. That is the final truth. The ultimate reality. Medieval assassins were agents of pure destruction. Their lives were wasted. Their victims' lives were stolen, and the world was worse for everything they did. That is not dramatic. That is not exaggerated. That is just what the evidence shows. Cold, brutal, undeniable evidence of a profession that shouldn't have existed, but did. And the fact that it did exist tells us terrible things about medieval society and uncomfortable things about human nature. We're capable of this. Under certain conditions, we'll do this. That is the warning. That is the lesson. Not that medieval assassins were uniquely evil, that humans, including us, are capable of becoming them if circumstances push hard enough. Remember that the next time someone tries to romanticize assassins, remember the truth, the whole truth, the miserable, brutal, horrifying truth. And maybe, just maybe, that knowledge will make you more grateful for living in a society where this profession is mostly unnecessary, where murder for hire is rarer, where victims have better protection, and families have better support. Medieval assassins suffered so we could learn. Their victims died so we could understand. The lesson is, don't create the conditions where assassination flourishes. Build societies with strong justice systems, economic safety nets, social mobility, because when those things fail, people become assassins, and everyone loses. That is the truth. That is the lesson. That is where this story ends. With knowledge bought through centuries of suffering, don't waste it.